Does that sound familiar? Well, apparently to AEW and Tony Khan, it does. The term has been following AEW throughout its 5 years of existence. Fun fact, a channel also creates compilations of every botch that has happened in AEW. It's true, chat, there are channels out there giving their fully leaning takes on wrestling, especially towards AEW, to garner negative attention. But in this case, it is best to have an honest conversation and criticism regarding Tony Khan's Ring of Honor and when they fumble the bag. The entire IWC began to feel the loss of one of the most revolutionary promotions in the US when Ring of Honor announced that they would go on a hiatus, leaving their future uncertain. As we were ready to let go of Ring of Honor, the founder and owner of AEW, Tony Khan, came out on TV to announce that he had acquired the promotion. At this point, AEW was doing very well for itself, and it gave all of us, including myself, hope. Over a year later, Ring of Honor TV on Honor Club has been average at best, with the exception that their pay-per-view events hardly miss like any AEW pay-per-view. While ROH had been struggling to find an identity, there were pros to the show that made it appealing. I recently made a video about how the women's division is thriving as we speak. Ring of Honor wrapped up the year with the culmination of the final battle, which was main evented by Athena versus Billie Starkz for the women's championship. As a result, Tony Khan introduced the Ring of Honor Television Women's Championship to give more women singles opportunities. See, personally, I would have vouched for a Ring of Honor Women's Tag Team Championship belt, but you know.
My company. Do what you want.
Anyways, journalists leaked some business deals between a pro wrestling company and the CW TV network months back. Nick Hausman from the House of Wrestling had gathered that Billy Corgan, the frontman of the Smashing Pumpkins and the owner of NWA, had secured a TV deal with the CW. This was great news for the National Wrestling Alliance because it is a milestone for their vision. Along with that exclusivity, Billy Corgan also mentioned that there would be a behind-the-scenes reality show on another TV channel. This was ideally planned to run before NWA Power, like how Tony Khan was trying to run AEW All Access. Unfortunately, NWA Power was quietly moved to the CW streaming app. This was said to have been the result of a controversial angle in the middle of the show, where Father James Mitchell and a few party people were having a taste of that baking soda. This attracted a negative buzz towards CW, which would explain why a spot opened up for another wrestling program. That wrestling show came to be WWE NXT, as they announced that they would move from USA Network to the CW app later in 2024 in October. This deal will be 5 years, which is a win for the WWE. This makes the product more accessible, which means it is easy to watch. Even folks who only watch television by antenna will have access to watching WWE NXT on the CW. It's accessible on my local channel 5. But this is great news for WWE NXT, as this was the case over a decade ago for WWE SmackDown between 2006 and 2008. Believe it or not, this is how I ran into my first episode of Friday Night SmackDown. I was drawn into the program because back in the day, the boys in school would hype it up. Since then, I haven't looked back. Instead, it drew me into a variety of pro wrestling styles. I digress. SmackDown was drawing in huge numbers during the time. Since it was accessible to anyone, it was easy to become a part of the WWE universe. During SmackDown's run on the CW, they were the television network's most must-see program. In fact, in late February of 2007, SmackDown's ratings reached 5.4 million views. The target demos would often aim at 18 to 34 and 18 to 49 in men. This means they had a solid adult audience that enjoyed watching WWE. It was a highlight of the CW on Friday nights. However, according to the LA Times and New York Times articles, the reasoning was that the CW was trying to blend into their network targeted towards women. They thought it wasn't a good fit to have an all-male programming running in a TV network that only runs shows like Gossip Girl and Vampire Diaries. During this time, the CW was under Don Ostroff's leadership. According to Bruce Pritchard from Something to Wrestle, he said that from WWE's end, they thought it was a bad look to have entertaining programming on TV network that wasn't on cable. Now, that seems very biased and condescending, but beside that, the topic has been talked about before. Fast forward to now. After Don's leadership was Mark Pedowitz, who introduced shows like Riverdale and the Arrowverse, where all DC comics were made into shows. From there, they received an increase of young male viewership, which then evolved to now under Dennis Miller's leadership. Dennis Miller has been leading the CW into a sports route, which is an advantage to any sport-related content to be showcased in that network. This is when professional wrestling joins the conversation. Before I keep rambling, please subscribe to my YouTube channel and help me reach my goal of 150 subscribers. Thank you. But despite all this rambling, the point is that Tony Khan fumbled, or may I say, botched that CW TV deal for Ring of Honor. Let me explain why. Historically, ROH has promoted its all-time best matches and stars throughout the 2000s. Years later, during a period when Ring of Honor and New Japan had a partnership due to Bullet Club, it was mainly those segments that drew interest for the brand, until ROH found themselves in a position where they lost their star power and the ship began to sink into a deep, dark hole. This happened because the Elite, the center characters of the ROH and New Japan partnership, left the company once their contracts ended and were approached by a billionaire, a wrestling fan named Tony Khan. Tony Khan approached the Elite with a major interest in starting a professional wrestling promotion as an alternative to the WWE. This happened due to the first All In 2018 show where the Elite independently promoted and sold over 11K in attendance. This was huge at the time since WWE was the only big ballpark in town. In a bet where a fan asked Dave Meltzer if he believes ROH can ever sell thousands of seat venues, in which he confidently responded with huge doubt. Cody Rhodes, who was the face of ROH at the time, would take that bet and would become instrumental to the movement. All In success would wound up being known as a love letter to professional wrestling, as it did pretty well for a show that wasn't promoted by the WWE. This came at a time when WWE's content went stagnant with an in-ring quality, hence why there was demand for an alternative wrestling that wasn't like the E. In my previous video named ROH Simply Dark Lacking Red, I stated that the brand has been utilized as AEW Dark 2.0 and that there is more gray than there is any trace of red. It's like bacteria living in a deceased body with no blood pumping through its veins. Ring of Honor's veins. After explaining the brief history of how AEW came about through proving that a non-WWE entity like ROH can draw interest, I argued that ROH needs to be AEW's developmental brand. The same way we view NXT to WWE is how ROH must be leveled next to AEW's main roster. It would make sense because, as I mentioned earlier, AEW was just an idea, but what sparked the idea into fruition was All In, which was promoted by ROH and the Elite. I cannot stress this any more further. ROH should be AEW's developmental USA Network channel. With the sports era coming into the CW, professional wrestling can finally be cool again among sports fans. Knowing how WWE is, they will make the most out of that deal, and that's the crazy part. A few months ago, House of Wrestling released hot news about the CW's interest in bringing pro wrestling back to its platform. According to the article, a high-level executive approached Khan at the LA Forum in June 2022 about bringing Ring of Honor content to the network. Based on the information provided, Tony did not want to entertain new deals for ROH until AEW's TV rights are in play, which is going on as we speak. The article further explains that Tony Khan felt that he would have more options and leverage the marketplace by waiting. This was quite the ballsy move by Tony Khan. Imagine getting approached by an executive from an established broadcasting network about interest in working a deal to get a return on your investment by helping them achieve their business direction to becoming a sports channel. If Tony Khan wanted to keep Honor Club, he could have just rebranded it into something similar to the WWE Network and then secure a deal with WBD to also be on Max. This way, we can move past TV ratings and rewind back to enjoying wrestling. This deal could shed some spotlight on the AEW talent and highlight pro wrestling as an alternative, unlike WWE's product. After this point in ROH's existence, there are many what-ifs after seeing that the company has suffered plenty of mishaps over the past 2 decades. I mentioned earlier that the show is like watching a paid version of AEW Dark 2.0 with unknown wrestlers getting booked to be squashed. Even that hasn't helped elevate any signed talent to establish an identity under the brand. As a result, these choices have plummeted interest in subscribing to Honor Club. As much as I'd run it differently, I'm not the owner or booker, so it's fair to say that I'm just whining. However, Kerry Silken, former owner, ambassador of Ring of Honor, and longtime fan, can give valid feedback on his thoughts about today's banner under Tony Khan. Kerry Silken was a part of Ring of Honor from 2004 to 2022, serving as the owner from 2004 to 2011. He then sold to Sinclair Broadcast to become an ambassador from 2011 to 2022, entering retirement. His contributions to Ring of Honor are instrumental to why the promotion has been around this long. He owned and financed the promotion after a controversy that the former owner caused. This almost damaged their image in its early years. His involvement would flip things around as he would book foreign talent to bring exposure to the American audience. His era was highly praised, but unfortunately it was digging a hole in his finances. He would admit that his unfamiliarity with making broadcasting deals cost him a fortune, as he would wound up spending up to tens of millions of dollars. Ego and passion were the right motives for Silken to admit to his persistence in running Ring of Honor. He was content that it was a solid platform for talent like Seth Rollins, formerly known as Tyler Black, to climb the mountain. Heart and soul would be an understatement for Kerry's persistence in running Ring of Honor. In a way, he's got a lot of things in common with Tony Khan than we would realize. They are both wrestling fans. To an average person like myself, and maybe you, they both live pretty comfortable lives. You dig? Kerry still feels immense regard for ROH, and when he heard the news about Tony Khan's acquisition, his thoughts were a gut punch and a great joy at the same time. Kerry's mixed emotions have caused him to express his feelings about a lack of past ROH stars, most notably Jay Lethal. He clarified by saying that he has nothing against Tony Khan, but that Kerry wishes Khan restored the feeling. Kerry goes on by saying, "It's still alive today, but even in the worst times of my ROH, even in the worst times of the Sinclair ROH, there was like, we're all in this together kind of thing. It was a family. The fans are family. And I like Tony Khan, and he's a good guy. And he's got so much on his plate that I just think the current Ring of Honor is, I can't come up with the right words. Maybe I'm sour grapes a little, but it's not gelled together properly." I'm going to keep it 100 with y'all. I was not watching ROH back in the day. I studied my way into it and still am, but even I can sense a lack of flavor in the brand. I pay and watch Honor Club because I'm still lingering on to the idea that it's going to get better. It's like being in a toxic relationship with someone hoping it can get better. I've said this before and I'll say it again. I'm an AEW believer. I really want it to succeed. But if changes don't happen sooner, ROH could become a failed revival project like WWE's ECW and eventually fade to black.